Hi, Ruth. How are you today?
I'm very good. How are you doing, Sam?
Very well, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Darby's podcast, a space where we share real stories of growth, resilience, and leadership. The goal, of course, is to inspire and support students' personal, professional, and entrepreneur ambitions. Just a quick one about Ruth. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ruth Larson, Senior Lecturer and Program Leader in History at the University of Derby, and a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. Ruth is a leading voice in British social and cultural history, recognized for her interdisciplinary approach and her influential work on women's role in the country house. With over 2 decades of experience in teaching, curriculum design, external examining, and her current service on the University of Derby's Governing Council, she brings deep insight into both the past and the future of higher education. She has been named University Lecturer of the Year, has served as governor in both primary and secondary schools, and is an active member of the East Midland Centre for History, Learning and Teaching. Welcome on the show, Ruth.
Thank you very much for asking me to come along.
How are you doing today?
Really good. Yes, really lovely.
I suppose it's interesting to pick it from the very start with Ruth. And I know I've had a lot of interaction with you, and it's beautiful to see the kind of personality you possess. And I know you've been very supportive, especially to us at the Union of Students, and with respect to being a member of the governing council. And so, but really, I'm just really conscious, especially for those who may not know you. And I also know I don't know so much about your growing up. Who is Ruth?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I grew up in Merseyside. I grew up just outside of Liverpool. And I was really lucky. We may not have been the richest family in traditional senses, but I was deeply loved by my family. And I really, really had a very happy childhood. Enjoyed learning. I was one of those kids who looked forward to school. Although I loved the summer, I lamented school holidays because I was really, really loved learning. And I was encouraged by the school to go to university. And when I was a teenager, I wasn't sure about what I wanted to do, but my big brother had instilled with me a love of castles. And because I lived in the Northwest, we often went to Wales, we saw the castles of North Wales, and I thought, well, I want to find out more about those. And I didn't quite think at first that history was the place where you could study about castles. I was wrong about that, it seems, but I didn't think that. So combined with my fascination with Vikings, because my surname's a Viking surname, I went to the University of York and studied archaeology. And I was of the first generation to go to university. I didn't really know any university students. So when I was 17, thinking about going to university, I took myself off to the student bars in Liverpool to see what students were like, to try and get an understanding of what the student experience would be like. Because I'm curious about how people work. So I went down and I learnt 3 things. One, they all wore black T-shirts. So I thought I have to buy a black T-shirt before I go to university. Second was they drank black coffee, so I thought I have to do that as well. And the third, they all eat carrot cake. I don't know why that was the case. That seemed to be the vogue at that time. So I got to love carrot cake and black coffee. I did buy some black T-shirts, but they never really suited me. And I went off to York University. And I loved the archaeology degree, but that interest in people kept me going and understanding how they worked and how they functioned. So while the buildings and the material culture of the past does give you part of those answers, I also wanted to know what they said. So I went on and did a master's in medieval studies, which opened the door to interdisciplinarity, made me rethink about what history was really like, got me to really think about art and art history in a way that I've never done before, and gave me a new love of literature, including Chaucer. And so that's where I really began to understand that the past was a fantastic place to understand people, because people are endlessly fascinating.
Archaeology, then medieval studies,
Yes.
and for your PhD, history.
Yes.
Did you know what the path was going to be for you?
Not at all, no. And if you'd asked me at 17, would I have carried on within studying year after year after year? Certainly not at all. Each step was, oh, that looks interesting, why not? And I've never been afraid of being personally brave in terms of thinking, well, that's curious and that will work, and I get the opportunity. And I was fortunate to get funding opportunities to be able to follow the route through, because for financial reasons I would have struggled otherwise. But that gave me real chances. But I was driven by my curiosity, and it was always within a safe way as well. So I'm quite a cautious person in terms of I won't take ridiculous risks. I need to think everything through. I plan everything very carefully, but in doing so, if I think, well, actually that still works as a good idea, I will leap. And I took a year out between, or it didn't plan to be a year, it planned to be more than 1 year between finishing my masters and going on to do the PhD, when I worked in the civil service. And I absolutely loved that. I loved the world of work. I loved the experience and the quite structured way that working within the civil service gave me. But I went back to do the PhD sooner than I'd planned, because funding opportunities came up, and there was a job advertised which was doing a PhD alongside working with country houses in Yorkshire to develop the understanding of the role of women in those institutions. And that was an absolute gift. That was completely what I wanted to do. So I would have been daft to wait.
I'm tracing your story, and I think it starts with a bit of curiosity, and you proceed to the next step, and it feels like you find passion, and which again translates to purpose. But I'm thinking for the random students, again, bringing the conversation back and the audience, which the purpose of this conversation is to help students gain the inspiration to also find their path. And I want to believe again that a lot has changed. And this brings me to the topic of conversation, which I really want to have with you today, which is around the changing world order and the place of course, education, higher education, and how it's important for us to start thinking about different ways to approach situations. One of the things I think has really changed a lot would be the generation of students who are really passionate about purpose, and the generation of students who are passionate about financial gains. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think whilst you were still studying, there was a lot of students who were really more motivated about passion. And for instance, just like you said, what led you to archaeology was because of your passion, the stories you've read, and the narrations from your brother, and your ancestry, especially with your last name. So it feels like there was a lot that really accumulated to making you go for that field of study. But I'm thinking now, a lot has changed. I think one of the reasons why students now go to school is because what of the financial benefits that comes afterwards. And the question for me then would then be, with the new changing world order, where do you draw the line between purpose and the financial gains? Because I think financial gains is actually important again in the new world order.
Yeah. And I don't think there necessarily needs to be a line. There's that old truism, and it's slightly silly, that if you love your job, you never work. But purpose and financial gains aren't necessarily distinct, because if you find what you're really passionate about, it enables you to think about the ways in which you can explore that in career senses. And yes, I followed an academic route, and I'm really lucky that I've got this job. I'm ridiculously lucky that there's very few full-time history lecturers in the country, really, if you think about sort of the big numbers compared to those who study history at undergraduate level. But those sort of the things that I was interested in, which is how people worked and the way that buildings shape that people work. I did have alternative paths to go into, so I was interested in human resources and working with people, and I did look at graduate jobs in that area, and if things had gone differently, I may have ended up along that line. And within the civil service, I was in the land registry, which was about the exchange of property, and the job I was at was an entry-level job. But there were future opportunities there to think about land and people and spaces, and again, they're my passions historically, but they're also the ways I'm interested in people. So the quirky bits of everybody's passion. I think everybody's nerdy about something weird, something that works for them that's quite difficult to explain. But they don't necessarily need to be different from the straightforward passion. So if it's just the money doesn't work for me, clearly I like money, but money isn't my driver. Making a difference is my big driver. But it doesn't mean that I have to live in financial penury. It means that I can have that impact while also actually living quite a comfortable lifestyle as well. And that's what really drives me.
I think that's really fascinating. Another point of conversation for me would be going back to higher education and teaching and learning, and maybe close to what some of the things you just highlighted now. A lot has changed, especially when it comes to students turning in their assessments.
Yes.
And how do you think that's playing out in the humanities?
The old style of assessment, which we've rarely done at Derby, and actually since I've joined at Derby, they've always been very innovative, the assessments here, but I speak to colleagues who teach at other institutions. It was very exams and essays. And that's great for regurgitating information, particularly exams are great for regurgitating information. But I have never been asked, when I'm a historian, I've been never asked about dates and knowing things instantly and being able to recall them instantly. What I need to do as part of my job as a historian, but thousands upon thousands of jobs need this, is to make sense of information, to be able to use that information to present clear arguments and to persuade others of that role. I do that in my role as a governor, I do that in my leadership roles, I do that in all the other bits of my job as well as my jobs as a historian. Assessments need to reflect those skills of thinking, using evidence to present arguments. That's why we've introduced different types of assessment. That includes seminar participation, where students discuss ideas and debate, present their ideas to their fellow students and encourage those discussion and debates. And they happen live. And people learn not only to communicate, an oral communication, but the really important skill of listening. Because listening, everybody talks about communication skills and good oracy, which is obviously important, but good listening is really important, and for discussions and debates to happen, to hear somebody said something and said, but that's interesting, what about that as well, and to learn how to argue, not angrily, but about different types of information. And for humanities, we're perfectly set for that skill set because all of the different humanities subjects are interested about people's ideas, people's thoughts, and people, of course, are contrary. They do the same thing for different reasons and different things for the same reasons. Being able to say, this person did this, and so this person did something different. One wasn't right, one wasn't wrong. They were motivated by different things, or they led to different decisions, and that discussion is a really important part of assessing.
Now, I'm conscious in the present time and age, there's the art skills, and this would include what you study in school, the contents, the models, and then the soft skills, which I think is most of the things, some things you've just made reference to. I want to put it to you, art skills or soft skills?
Oh yeah, I think it's a combination of the two. It's using academic skills to develop the soft skills. That sense of using your subject that you're passionate about and the information that you're passionate about. Most students who study a humanities subject absolutely love the discipline area, but they use those information to present, to develop those soft skills. We also get our students to create online learning resources. In doing so, they communicate about history, but they also develop digital skills, design skills. They think about presenting information to different types of audience, all of which is useful for different settings and different jobs. One of our graduates, for example, a history graduate, has now got a senior role within fleet management in the railway industry. And she says that the ability to read data and to understand the data that she developed by looking at 18th century letters, she's been able to transfer into looking about data about the trains and being able to make sure that in the right place, that they're clean, they're safe, that they've been well managed. Very different different type of data set, but the same skills underpin it. And that's why humanities degrees and lots of other degrees, psychology and plenty of other degrees, are often golden key degrees. Yes, you've got that knowledge of the subject area, but they open up lots of doors because you learn how to understand people, you learn how to understand information, you develop the ability to communicate, to work effectively by yourself. We also do a lot of team projects in our courses in the humanities, so they have to work with others, and that sometimes means that students have to learn how to lead, but also they have to learn how to co-lead, which is also a really important skill for family life, personal family life, but also in the business.
It's expedient now in the new world order for students not just to pick the art skills, the contents of the models, but also consciously developing those inevitable soft skills that translates to the new world order and that helps them eventually in when they get a job or any other thing. That's what I'm trying to pick from the conversation.
Absolutely, certainly, because the reality is that most young people now, if they graduate at 21, they're likely to be working until they're 70. And as a historian, I'm very aware how much the world has changed in the last 50 years. The next 50 years is very much going to change. That ability to be flexible, the ability to develop the human skills in a world full of AI where the data is readily available, it's easily accessible, but it's making sense of the data, making sense of the information, asking questions of it, testing it. That's what humans do really well, which currently systems do not. The questioning of the data. I, for example, the other day, I was really shocked by this. I was looking for a quotation, but I was reading it in a book and I saw the quotation and I thought, I want to put that on a slide. And I was being slightly lazy, I have to admit. Rather than typing it up, I was hoping to find it digitally so I could copy it over. Straightforward. Right, I put it into a simple search engine, the beginning bit, and it told me it didn't exist, and it told me that author didn't write that, and that was a fib. And I looked at it thinking, no, I'm here reading his book, and it was Karl Marx. It wasn't obscure, and it wasn't that obscure a quotation. That ability to use those different skill sets, to think about different information, and to interrogate, that's what's going to help people, but also to teach themselves. Lifelong learning, I think university graduates have the ability to, if they've done well in their degrees, have taken all the opportunities that university gives them to be able to develop new skills, to develop those things. Nobody taught me how to use Teams or digital materials or whatever, but I was given all the skills about how to teach myself so that I was able to do that when we suddenly had to move to online learning, when I suddenly had to make YouTube videos and I hadn't even really used YouTube before. All of those things because I learned how to learn, and that's a brilliant skill, and that's what good university education will give people.
I think that really caught my attention, learning how to learn. And I think that's very, very important in the present age and time. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think, just like you said, that's should be the goal of the university, especially in this time. Because there feels to be, it seems there's a lot of learning rapidly rushing at us. And it could include how to use AI, the best way to use AI. And I've had this conversation over and over again. I've met two different set of students, those that are really very skeptical about using AI and those that go overboard in the adoption of AI. And the question is, how do you learn to really use it to your advantage? How do you learn to use it the right way? Again, learning how to learn. Ruth, what's your greatest failure so far?
Oh, failure. Gosh, that's a tough question. Gosh, I'm such a positive person. I always think of failures as successes, which is, and that somebody was saying this to me the other day. They said, "Oh, you're permanently sunny," and I think I am. If I was very brutal about myself, I would probably say that I should have written the book based on my PhD thesis much earlier. That's the traditional idea, is that I should have done that much earlier, and I didn't. But I'm glad I didn't, because by not doing so, I was given an opportunity to work with a wonderful historian called Anthony Fletcher, to work collectively to use both of our research to produce a book that came out last year that I'm really, really proud of. And I think that failures is that sense of there's little things all the time that don't go quite right, but thinking about actually where you can make that good. I'm a big skeptical believer in karma. So that's to say, not the religious end of karma, but the more day to day. That actually sometimes things don't work here, but they will come out somewhere else. They will work for you. And I got the opportunity to work with that fantastic historian Anthony because of something I'd done 15 years earlier, and I worked really hard at that the 15 years earlier, and that enabled the second opportunity. So sometimes you have to be patient. So it sounds corny. This is probably I'm slightly embarrassed saying this. I don't think of failures. I think of delayed success.
And that's very important. And the reason why I asked that is, again, this is the phase of life in many students' life where they are trying to pick on so many things and asking the most important question, at least at the moment now, which is, what's the purpose? What will I do? What's my passion? And when I think about passion now and the current generation of students, it feels to be very fickle, ever evolving and changing. And I think one of the major reasons is, again, the contribution of social media. You see this person and you want to be like them. And then the next minute you see the next person. No, I want to be this. So it feels like it's harder to really define purpose. It's harder to really find passion. Perhaps it might have been easier years back because, again, social media was not so prominent, and it's easier to just really walk away in your small circles and the few people you are really opportune to access. But now it feels it's very easy. You can literally see anyone and everyone. And that's why I thought the question of failure might be important, especially for the random students who perhaps just tried out something, or they are trying something and they failed at it. And they're asking the question, what went wrong? Was it my passion? Was it my purpose? Was it something I did wrong? So I think the big for me, just like you said, it's how do we reinforce that failure could also be translated to delayed success?
Yeah, and I would also slightly push back. I think young people and humans generally are always curious, and yes, social media gives them lots of noise that comes in for those that follows, but it also gives great opportunities to explore the bits that you're passionate about, and the chances and the opportunities to suddenly find new worlds and new bits of information, and being open to actually those curious questions, and to think, well, actually, because I very much enjoyed the Winter Olympics, my social media feed is full of stuff about skating, and actually that's led me to a whole world of curiosity about what skating was like in the 1920s, and it's given me a new little rabbit hole in my spare time to follow, because I'm interested in those changing ideas and the changing people, and often giving yourself the space to think, oh, actually, what is it that makes me tick? And it doesn't need to be very precise. It doesn't need to be the role of aristocrats in the 18th century, but rather instead the bigger thing. How do societies work? How do people work? And I would encourage students to think about what of those questions do they find really interesting. And when in a lecture they suddenly hear something, or they speak to one of their tutors, or they read a book and they go, oh, that's interesting, is to actually start asking that question elsewhere. One of my colleagues described it once as a little bit like a magnet. You eventually find your magnet that really all the questions come back to, and everything that comes is metal files that come back to that question, and it's sometimes quite a big one. How do economies work? Why do some businesses succeed? Why is it that things go wrong? Those types of questions. And if you find you're one of those, or you're half a dozen of those, I'm not suggesting that there's one, that suddenly gives you different purpose to deal with, to make the noise positive noise, more information that you can work with positively.
And how many times can one fail before they stop trying?
There's sometimes a chance you have to listen to the failures and think, did that fail because bad luck or something else or all of those things, or because I didn't care? Because if it was around not caring, then ask yourself why you didn't care. That's quite an important thing to be reflecting on. I joke about trusting your spidey sense with the students, but actually this is never going to work. I'm uncomfortable. I'm pretending to be somebody I'm not, or I'm pretending to have an interest that I'm not, then that's actually quite a useful bit of data for you to listen. But if you think, well, actually, I'm going to carry on working with that. And I think about, it was a long time ago, but I think about my graduate who applied for 120 jobs before she got the one that she got. But she kept on going, and she got an amazing job that she absolutely loves. And each application she saw as an audition that took her on to the next step. And yeah, she was resilient beyond all belief, but she just kept on going because she treated applying for jobs like a job, and yeah, she got where she wanted to go.
I mean, two things just caught my attention right there. I think the first thing is what you mentioned around pretending to be who you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's intriguing for me because it's, again, relates back to the previous conversation I had with one of the guests. And we were saying how it's expedient to, again, the phrase, fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking from the point of view of the soft skills. Out there, it's very hard to be confident. It's hard to be an exceptional and eloquent speaker.
Yeah.
And we're saying it from the point of view of you have to pretend to be it. And I was very vulnerable in the episode because I said, there are so many times I've had to also pretend to be confident.
Yeah.
And I've had students walk up to me and tell me, "Oh, Sam, you're so confident." And the moment they leave, really? I'm not sure. Because I think at those moments, I was faking it. I was pretending to be it. And the goal, especially from the conversation, was how you keep doing that. You keep doing that until it becomes a part of you in some sense.
Yeah.
And the other bit for me was the fact that I think resilience, what you mentioned, how someone applied for about 120 jobs. And I have friends who are in the third year, especially now, and I know some of them have been telling me how they've been applying over and over again. And again, that can be very, very demoralizing, challenging, and oh my God, do you have to do this again? Especially when you get there. Unfortunately, that's what you just told me when I called them. Oh, how's it going? And then they go, oh, I just got another, unfortunately. Okay, that's fine. Just keep at it. So I suppose the question for me in this two scenario is, first, do you think it's okay to pretend till you get some of those things?
Yeah.
Do you think it's okay to pretend you have the job until you actually get the job? In this scenario, just like you rightly said, how they kept picking out the lesson from the previous failure and kept going. So more like pretending to be fine, pretending like nothing happened, pretending. Because I feel if you're weighed by the emotions of the failures, you wouldn't want to try again. So how do you think we can really explore the concepts now, given in the concepts now of pretense?
Yes.
With respect to helping students shape their next phase?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question because the pretending's really important. It is, and I pretend I'm confident.
Yeah, and it feels like a very bad word when you say you pretend.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with it because you're trying out. You're practicing, and the idea of the difference between your professional self and your personal self, I'm quite comfortable with that. You put on your equivalent of a suit and you present yourself in those ways. But I said being the things that you're not, that's more, it doesn't align with your passions and your values. That's more the sense. I couldn't do a job where I had to persuade people to spend money that sell sell unfortunate things that was not going to benefit the individual. That wouldn't work for me. My values are too strong there. So that's what I meant by the not suiting. Hopefully very few people fall into that type of thing. But the pretending's really important. Thinking that you've got the job, acting as though you're there and you belong. And people talk about imposter syndrome, and yes, it's real. It's completely real. But it's sometimes useful to remember that if you feel it, so do most other people, and that's okay. And that sense of which eventually that begins to become a more comfortable sense. And I still remember the first time teaching a university class, and my legs shook so much because I was lecturing. They shook so much that at the end of the class I couldn't actually walk because my legs had shook and they'd locked themselves. And I was thinking, I don't think I'll ever be able to bend my legs again. And the class slowly leave, and I left, and I thought, okay. But actually, I was petrified, but I thought, okay, I've learned that now, and I've learned I'm going to have to walk about when I talk, and so I took the learning steps.
And when did that stop? When did you stop?
I'm always a bit nervous, actually, because. But it's good nerves. It's more like adrenaline-y types of nerves, because you never know what's going to come back. Teaching should be a dialogue. So yes, I'm nowhere near as scared as I was. But just this week I gave a paper, and I was quite nervous then because I was giving it to people who I'd not seen for a long time. They were the people I did my PhDs with, and senior academics. I thought, I hope this works. And it was very new, and I felt quite vulnerable. But I also thought to myself, this is good for me. That feeling and that sharing and that exploration and being fierce sometimes is a good thing.
And how do you get out of that nervousness or the fear? Because again, I know this is where many students find themselves. And I know we've just spoken about the need for students to start picking up some certain soft skills.
Yeah.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the most essential soft skills you want to have as an individual, the present age and time, is skill of communication. And how you can sell your idea.
Yeah.
Because now it feels like what you have on paper is not enough to sell you.
No.
Again, there's I distrust personally too for anything on paper, because you could have used some AI to generate that. I don't trust you. But so hence the need for some high level of presentation skills, confidence in presenting those thoughts, those contents. At the moment, on the spot, and I get nervous too many times. How personally have you been able to get out of that state? And still get whatever you want to get out.
So a lot of it's about trusting the information and knowing your information as well. So if you ask me to do a presentation now about human biology, and in front of 30 people, I'd be sick. I'd be physically sick. I could do the history of it, but the modern version of it, no, not at all. So you need to know your information. You need to trust your information. And that's a massive part of around the communication, is actually putting that legwork in. And then it's thinking about your audience. And that's why I said before, listening's a really important part of talking. What's it like to listen to? What am I saying? How's that going to listen to? And if you think about those terms, that's also important. And then the third one, which I think is really difficult because back to social media, but there's a lot of grumpy people on social media who are very rude but most people you speak to are interested in listening to you. And you may think me ridiculous, naive, but I think most people are kind and are actually wanting to hear positive things and to be positive with the people in the room. And if you recognise that the audience is likely to be on your side. And that starting place, actually, to present early on to people who are on your side, who are interested in the things that you're interested in, will really help you grow those skills for that point where you may have to do a more difficult presentation to a more sceptical audience. But learning to trust yourself, your information, and learning to think positively about the audience and the listening experience, that will really help.
And maybe learning to pretend to be
Yes.
confident,
Yes.
at least in those beginning moments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just trying to connect everything.
Selling. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Good for you.
I know you sit on the university's governing council. And again, this takes me to leadership. What do you think leadership is in the present age and time?
Well, I think it's important to see the distinction between leadership and management. So management is making sure that things work in the right way and are all in the right order and that bureaucratic end of things. Leadership is about encouraging others to follow or to make the right decisions and to go their own way. So there's the following, there's the independence and to go the right way. And it's opening up those opportunities for the people that you are working with to do those, to make those decisions that are best for the business, for the project, and maybe for themselves. But it's also about clearing unnecessary barriers that don't need to be there, but also making people safe in different ways so that that people can fail well, maybe, or that decisions can be made effectively. And senior leadership, so the types of things we talk about on the governing council, is often about creating a space where the decisions can be made that are going to benefit many people, but are going to do so in a way that is necessarily not going to harm others, and we create the edges to those decision making processes. And the same school with being governors in school. It's about enabling the head teachers to make the decisions which will benefit the pupils, but to do so in such a way that they don't spend all the money, or that they don't harm the pupils, or they don't bring the institution into disrepute. So leadership is about giving people the agency to choose in a way that collectively will benefit the shared project. And it's understanding the projects that's important, understanding the vision of if it's small leadership, the types of things that students are often doing on projects. Where's it going? Why is it doing that? What's it? And understanding the why is what leadership's about.
It's intriguing to pick up from some of the things you just said now, how that there's a lot to do with decision making when it comes to leadership. And I know this firsthand too. I think one of the most scariest moments for me in the university governing council is whenever we have to make approval on anything. And it's scary for me because I think whatever decision we make today, and which I'm a part of, might either make or mar the fate of the university. I think that's the scariest part of decision making for me. And just like you said, one of the essential parts of leadership is helping people, giving people the rights to really consciously make decisions that, again, is to the advantage of the whole organization, irrespective of how big or how small. And the bit for me is in the lives of students, again, going back to students, 18, 19, 20, 21. I think these are the phases where you have to make a lot of really life-changing decisions. And I think it's very delicate because they can either make or mar your future. And those decisions, again, would include career decision, whether to have a family or not, faith, belief, values. What do you think are the essential factors that students should think about when they are making decisions?
And it's about gathering the information. It's back to where I started about that idea of making sure that you have the right information to make those decisions in, and to think about those next steps. Being well informed decisions. You don't know all of the things that will happen. You can't look into the future. I sometimes scenario plan in terms of if we do this and that, if we do this and that, and think about the ripples,
The pros and cons.
of the place, but also recognising that you can't see the future. You can see the immediate impacts, but 20, 30, 40 years, you're not going to be able to decide. And life is full of ups and downs and things you might not plan, and you may decide to go other ways. And that's a real challenge sometimes, but it's a good challenge. And if you need to talk to others, then there are loads of people who will help students at the university. There are lots of people who will support you with that decision making, whether it's your academic team, your personal academic tutor, whether it's a careers team. There are hundreds of people around the university, but sometimes talking it through, but it's why and on what basis are you making that decision. And if you get that why and the what basis, and that has a real impact.
Why and what basis? I think that's really very important there. What's your greatest success?
My students are my greatest success, and most certainly, and seeing how they go and develop, but also when they're with us and they're learning and they develop their passions and their interests, and I love seeing the curiosity, the ways that they grow. And people may think, I look at the students who've had glorious careers or they've done really well academically as my strongest successes, but that's not actually not the case. Possibly my strongest success is a student who, when he started, I really thought, gosh, is university right for you? But he was really keen to do it and really keen to learn. And him graduating and him taking the most out of the university experience and his joy at graduation and his joy at learning, he definitely didn't get the highest grade I've ever given, but that is a real success. And I've heard from him relatively recently, and he loves life. He's a happy man. He's gone to the journey that he wants to go, and that's what success for me looks like.
I think it's intriguing and a bit emotional for me when I heard you talk about how, and I think this is the question some students also ask themselves, is university for me? Because it feels like it's harder for them to learn. It's harder for them to pick some of those things up. It's just so really intriguing. How does that always feel for you being a lecturer when you see students in those phases of life?
It's difficult, and it's important to know whether the barriers are, what the barriers are and what's happening and why they feel like that. And again, back to the point of listening. And is it a lack of self-confidence? Is it a lack of awareness, of support? Or is it that there's other things which are in the way, and trying to understand that and trying to help the students to understand that. And early on in my career, within history, we have quite a lot of books on our reading list, but we don't expect to read all of the students to read all of the books cover to cover, because they couldn't possibly do that. There aren't enough hours in the day. And I thought that was obvious. And I remember a student saying, I can't read all of that this week. And I was thinking, I wasn't expecting you to read 50,000 pages in the next week. That would be impossible. And it made me realise that actually sometimes the things that the students are worrying about are actually things that we've just poorly explained. Listening to them to understand what their worries are, and to enable them that if they've got here and they've been offered a place, then yes, it is for them. But if there's other factors that come in that mean that they need to make decisions about maybe a break of study, then actually giving them the positive choices about where to go to next and what's the most appropriate thing for them.
I think that's really very intriguing. More collaboration between the student concerned and their place, the importance of the academics in those situations to again reinforce to those students that you can do it. Maybe it's just something is just not right. That's very important. I think we've said a lot already on this podcast. What is it that you think we've not spoken about?
Oh, God.
And you really like to get out there?
I don't know. No. I think I love my time at university, and that's one of the reasons I've stayed at university, because it gave me lots of opportunities to explore lots of new things and lots of different things, and led me to finding other passions in my life. I'd never really been much of a cinema goer previously, but I found new types of cinema, and that's a really important part to my sense of self. University has lots of different things to give to give people. I met my life partner at university. We're together 30 years later. So it was very brilliant for me. And thinking about those positive opportunities at university. And it isn't all straightforward. I didn't breeze through it. I found it difficult. But I asked for help, and people helped, and I succeeded. And not being afraid to ask for help and not being afraid to get the most out of university. That's what I'd really like to say to students.
I think that's really, really very beautiful. Thank you very much for your time so far. And just on that note, I realized next month will make it your 21st
Yes.
anniversary of being at the University of Derby.
Yes.
That's a very long time coming, actually.
I started when I was 4, honest.
That's a very long time. And definitely you must have been enjoying your days here.
Yes, certainly. Yes,
I suppose one more question I was going to ask you that I didn't ask, I haven't asked, would be just briefly about your dissertation, your PhD dissertation on women. And I know you studied women and elitism and domesticism. Just conscious, how do you define elite women as also being domestic?
Yes. Oh gosh, I will be brief. Yeah. Not most people here aren't that interested. I'm interested in the women who live in country houses, the elite women who live in country houses, and their role in family life. So being mothers, being wives, being sisters, and how they function in making those houses homes, but also the way in which those models of homeliness enabled aristocrats and those who lived in those houses to remain powerful and to keep their position within society. But for listeners who are interested in that, I will sell my book, which is called Mistress Women in the Country House, and they can have a look at that instead, because we cover it in detail there.
Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you for offering me the opportunity to sell the book.
Oh, that's good. The final bit is, so on the episode, when we round it off, we have touching the light session and passing the torch. Yeah, that's it. Passing the torch. And the goal is you leave a question for the next person. But again, someone else left a question for you. Yeah. And their question for you is, what do you see your purpose as being?
Oh, gosh.
And then you leave a question for the next person.
So I see I have multiple purposes. So I see my purpose at the university to enable students to have the best possible learning experience so that they can go forward into the next steps of their life, inspired and informed. So I very much see that as my purpose as an academic.
And it's the same thing beyond the university.
Beyond university, for they're going. And my wider purpose is thinking about the ways in which we can share that amongst wider people. So that's part of the reason I'm on the University Governing Council, but school governors, is to learning as a positive force. I'm really passionate about that. My question for the next for the next person, is thinking about, we often ask people to think about their younger selves, but I would be interested in what the next person thought about their 25-year-old self instead, and what they would leave message to their 25-year-old self. And I say that because that's the age you've come out the next steps, and it becomes a bit tricky in terms of thinking about where you're going to go and where things are. And rather than the 16 and 18-year-old self, where everything's going to be okay, 25 is a difficult age. Yeah. And so I'd be interested to know what...
Where you're figuring out a lot of things.
Absolutely, and life's beginning to happen as well.
Thank you very much for your time so far. It's been great to have you here. Yeah. And thank you very much, everyone, for this episode of Dappages. So see you on the next. Thank you.